Hey everyone, on today's show we have Josiah LaRow as our guest. Josiah is running for Assembly District 20 here in Nevada as a Libertarian. He has been a highly active volunteer over the years, donating his time for groups like the American Cancer Society. Before we get to our conversation, I do want to mention that this episode has been brought to you by the Libertarian Party of Nevada. The Nevada LP wants to preserve and expand the freedoms of all Nevadans by reducing the size and scope of the state. Meet friendly, like-minded people at LP Nevada events, volunteer, run for office, or donate to the Nevada LP and help take a stand for freedom. For more information, go to lpnevada.org. Once again, that's lpnevada.org. Let's get to the show. And it's the Battleborn Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Sadak. Today's guest is Josiah LaRow. Hey, Josiah.
Hello, how you doing?
Thanks for coming on. I'm having you on because you're running for office as a Libertarian. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Definitely, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak with you. And yeah, I'm running for Assembly District 20, and that is located on the east side of Las Vegas. Think of Maryland Parkway right by UNLV, from Tropicana up to Desert Inn, all the way over to just past the 95. There's some little bits on the top and bottom that kind of get wonky because you know how the politicians like to draw the districts all crazy like. But yeah, there's some pieces above Desert Inn. There's some pieces below Tropicana. But yeah, so that kind of gives you the general gist of where that is.
Okay. Now? Why don't we back up here? And how did you get to the point where you became a libertarian? And well, obviously now you're running for office as a libertarian. So why don't you give me a little bit of the origin story?
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, I guess at the core, I've always been a libertarian. I just didn't really know what to call it. Um, it's kind of funny. Um, this might be a little bit too much personal information, but I'm also gay. And so it's kind of like I've always been gay, but I never really knew what to call it. So like when you get
Yeah.
to that point, you're like, you have that epiphany of like, oh, so that's what that is. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to an epiphany. Um, you know, in 2007, 2008 with Ron Paul of like, oh,
Sure.
so that's what libertarian is. And so, but I mean, like, I was writing papers in my like eighth and ninth grade English class, writing against affirmative action, writing for the legalization of marijuana, all these things when I was a kid. I'm like, well, that's certainly not a Republican and that's certainly not a Democrat. So, like, what is that? And so
So you
um,
felt kind of homeless, I guess, until you found, like, say, Ron Paul or something,
I
huh?
yeah, I mean, and I didn't really consider it to be homeless. I was just like,
Mhm.
I am who I am, right?
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
like I make my own home, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So and honestly, between you and me and the listeners is I didn't even join the Libertarian Party until last October-ish
Yeah.
time
You're like
frame,
me then.
September,
Yeah.
October.
Yeah.
Um, because that's also one of the things that I'm very passionate about is that we're all individuals, right? And that's a
Yeah.
libertarian idea. I'm very much a small libertarian, small L
Yeah.
libertarian. The Libertarian Party is one of those things that it takes a little bit for me to accept because it's like
Sure.
we're all independent, we're all individuals.
Yeah.
We might have things in common, and that's why we associate with those, that we have things in common. Um, but to attach to a political party is something that it tends to be a little bit more um, meaningful, for
Mhm.
lack of a better word, because then all of a sudden you're couched in with anybody else who says they're part of the Libertarian Party, and for better or worse.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was kind of always hesitant about that. So I'm like, well, I know a lot of libertarians that I don't want to be necessarily associated with. I mean,
Sure.
they might be good guys or good girls or ladies or whatever, but I don't necessarily want to be associated my philosophical or my political views with
Mhm.
them, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of created my own home. I kind of did my own thing, and
Mhm.
last year I was like, you know what? With everything that's going on, with the COVID lockdowns, with the censorship, with cancel culture, with just the wars, and just all of that stuff.
Yep.
I was like, you know what? I would love to think that I'm so important and so awesome that I can accomplish this by myself,
Yeah.
but that's not going to happen. So
Yeah.
I got to join in with somebody, and so I joined in with the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I was just thinking, like, going back to what you were saying when you were in like seventh or eighth grade, you were writing position papers on, what was it, affirmative action and drug legalization, right?
Yeah.
Oh, were those two of particular interest to you, or did they just hit their buttons like in your mind? Because I know there are certain things for me that hit but like buttons in my mind, and I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, this is why I feel this way, or this is why, how I arrived at this. Or are there anything like something similar to that for you, as far as
Yeah, I mean, like, well, obviously, when I was like in eighth or ninth grade, I wasn't, I didn't hold jobs, so I wasn't like worried that I was going to be overlooked for whatever reason.
Sure.
But for me, it was always just like this: we need to be treating people like people, right? And so that's how I was raised. That's how my mom raised me. She said, you know what, treat everybody equally. And when I look at these things, and I'm like, well, affirmative action is not treating people equally,
Yeah.
and in fact it's treating people very much unequal, you know and then I mean, even in my public school education, obviously I have plenty of issues with public schooling, but even in my public schooling education in Minnesota, it was Martin Luther King, right, said, you
Hmm.
know I want my children to be judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin or
Yeah.
any other immutable characteristics, right? Whether they're
Sure.
tall or short or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, affirmative action is not treating people by the content of their character. It's treating people
Uh,
by the color of their skin, which is exactly opposite of that. And so
yeah.
it was those contradictions that I saw in what the idea was, which, I mean, being generous, the idea of affirmative action is a helpful thing, right? It's people ideally trying to
If
be
you want to be
helpful.
charitable, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
which,
mean,
I like people being helpful. I like being helpful myself. That's
sure.
also how I was raised, is to help other people, but to help other people because you want to, because, you're voluntarily choosing to, not because it's required by law or you're being forced to.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was those types of just hypocrisies and contradictions in the things that people said versus the things that they did, or the way that the law was intended versus the way that it impacted actual communities. And so
Yeah, like
those
the
different,
way, what are the consequences of the
yeah,
whatever law it is? Yeah,
either
exactly.
the intended or unintended
Yeah,
consequences
yeah,
of whatever law it happens to be written. And so it was those things that just kind of got me going, this things aren't right here. And
yeah.
even back then I saw it from both sides. And I'm ashamed of myself in my fifth grade mock election. I voted for Bill Clinton, and I regret that vote to this very day.
Oh, well, now you can't be a Supreme Court justice
I
because they'll
know,
go back
right?
there and,
Yeah, they're gonna dig
you
up
know.
that from my history, be like, "Oh, man, what did he do?"
Wow. Well, I find it fascinating, however people arrive to where they're at, like politically or philosophically. I mean, like I said, there are certain buttons that pushed my buttons, or certain things that pushed my buttons when I would even say maybe around your age, like seventh and eighth grade, like just finding something like what is it? Oh, for example, like in the library when I was in junior high or whatever, there was a copy of The Federal Mafia by Erwin Schiff that
Mhm.
in the public library. And you can look and see, the story about him and everything else, but that literally like pushed a button in my mind as far as the nature of taxation and the
Mhm.
income tax and everything else. And for me being like, oh my god, this is the secret to everything, right? But then you
Yeah.
find out, maybe that's not exactly the way the world or the justice system or the laws work in this country. But that pushed a button in my mind, like I'm saying, or I was saying, and and it really pushed me down this path. And I ended up, like I remember Ron Paul, because Ron Paul had been around for so long.
I remember like on YouTube, there's that video of him on like the Morton Downey Jr. show from like must have been like late '80s or early
Maybe his
'90s when he
'88
was
presidential run.
maybe yeah when he was running as a libertarian, yeah,
Yeah.
and he was on the Morton Downey Jr. and talking about the war on drugs and how like you can't the way it's being prosecuted, it shouldn't be. It's illegal. It's immoral. You're putting people in cages that are where it's a medical problem, and it shouldn't.
Hmm.
You shouldn't be putting people in cages like that. But then he appeared in 2008, running as president for the Republican Party, and man, that campaign, that 2007, like those years,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And and I don't want to say that, oh, sorry, I got plenty of noises around here. I don't want to say that, I came across all these things, like from within, but
no, 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 there's
I think there is some innate um desire for independence in people, right? And it gets beaten out a lot of times, but I think that there is this innate like understanding of just and unjust
yeah,
and things like that. And so um when that's fostered, people tend to, from my experience, tend to go towards the libertarian side a lot more easily. But when it's beaten out, it takes a while to get people's attention. And like you said, that 2007. I mean, I graduated high school in 2002, so 2007, I was just out of college. So I graduated college in 2007. Um, and, still having that youthful energy and things like that. And I happened to be living just outside of Washington, D.C. at that
okay,
time. And so I went to a Ron Paul rally in DC, and I went to CPAC that year. And so, that was really kind of that thing. And I met Ron Paul for the very
oh
first time.
yeah,
Well, only for the one and only time. Um, and so, but yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of, well, who knows? I'm generalizing and assuming here, but from a lot of libertarians I've spoken to, I flirted with the Republican side, I guess. I was never actually ever registered as any party until this past October. But yeah, I think that, it takes that kind of uh, inspirational moment, or that kind of that light clicking on for people to be like, wait a minute, the things that I want to accomplish and the things that I want to do to help people, maybe the way that I'm going about it is not the best way. Just for a real quick example, I have a friend who is very much not a libertarian, who tends to lean to the left fairly heavily. Reached out to me one time because we would have discussions, about ideas and things like that. And she said, I was doing this project for school on healthcare. And she's like, I want everybody to be covered. But she came to this conclusion through this research that it's not really feasible having universal health care, through government. And she's like, it's a hard pill to swallow. It doesn't make me want to stop trying to get people covered. And I said, no, it shouldn't. We should want to take care of people. Well, I mean, I think we should want to take care of people, but forcing others to do it for you is, one, morally wrong, and then two, just the mechanisms that it's going to take, it's not possible. And she's like, yeah, unfortunately that's the case. And so, sometimes just, finding the right ways to challenge the ideas that some of these folks have on the right and the left, um, can get us those small steps closer to where, you and I want us to be. Oh, you are. I cannot hear you.
oh there you go.
There
Is
we
that
go.
better? Okay,
Yes.
so I was just saying that like on my end, what changed me for as far as like the imperialism, us
Mhm.
doing this foreign stuff was it was Ron Paul as far as like getting into okay, well, there's the blowback. I remember distinctly him talking about, like what would happen if we invaded these countries, like never any war, and he was right about everything as far
Hmm.
as, but it took me a while because I think my background is more traditional conservative Republican, which I really didn't really always feel truly comfortable on
Yeah.
that part. And I think a lot of it had to do with us, invading these countries, and doing all this stuff. So as far as what the libertarian position is, as far as like limiting our interventions overseas, I think that was the last thing and the hardest thing for me to overcome, because
Yeah.
I bought into, if we don't fight them over there, then they'll come over here and all this other stuff. I bought into all that. But anyway, I just wanted to share that as far as the things that pushed my buttons.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that again, I think it's a natural tendency for people to want to help. And so when we sell and have this propaganda for, we're going to go out and help defend democracy or fight for democracy, like generally that clicks in people's minds of like this is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the way we do it, and who is impacted, and not having a complete understanding of the situation on the ground of like, hey, different cultures require different aspects for government.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently bad about having the different cultures, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think I would love everyone to be free and independent and live, their lives how they want to live it, um, regardless of where they live. But at the same time, it's like to go over there and enforce our version, and I are meaning the US, the US's version of, what good governance looks like. Well, we can barely do that ourselves. We can't even do that ourselves. So, and seeing those types of things, yeah, I mean, it was always difficult for me, looking at that, and you know, during the first Gulf War, and then into the Balkans and things like that. I was a young kid. I was still in middle school, elementary school, but it just didn't ever sit right with me of like, why on earth are we bombing these people? Like, and now we talk about like, oh, we got to hurt Russia. Really? Do we really have to hurt Russia? Like, do we really have to do these things that are hurting millions of people that have absolutely no control over what their government is doing, whether that's in Russia or wherever? And the same thing goes for domestic policy. Like, we have bad people doing bad things, and instead of addressing those bad people and what the root causes of those things are, we're over here trying to hurt all the good people that are trying to do these blanket um, um, fixes that don't actually fix anything, and many times make it worse. I mean, and I know it's a controversial topic right now, especially, but gun control, I mean, that is just something like, I don't I know I have to try to be empathetic and try to understand other people's side, but it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me when you see those memes of like, there's one that said there's a sign that says gun free zone, and there's a sign that says teachers and administrators are armed and trained and will use deadly force to protect our children. Which one are you going to go into to cause havoc? You're not going to go into the one where you get shot. You're going to go to the one where
Yeah.
nobody has a gun.
Yeah.
And it's like, and no, like I personally, I don't really like guns. Like, I don't own a gun. I've thought about buying a gun, but I'm not like some person who's out there like, oh yeah, pro Second Amendment because I have 50 guns and I don't want them taken away. Like, I don't have any guns.
Yeah.
As of right now, I have no, what is it, dog in this fight, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Like, but my dog in the fight is the principle, the idea. Same thing for marijuana or other drugs. Like, I don't do them, but
Yeah.
my dog in the fight is the principle, right? And so,
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of times, people are shut out because they are an active gun user or an active drug user or whatever, and they're like, oh, you're just doing it for your own personal gain, right? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, I'm not. I'm not doing it for my
Yeah.
own personal gain. Like if heroin is legal, and I think it was in the 2008 presidential debates, maybe 2012, where it was in like North Carolina or something. That was one of the Republican debates, and Ron Paul was asked about drug legalization, and he basically said like, "Hey, if heroin is legalized, would any of you do it?"
Yeah.
And the answer was no. Like no, like
Yeah.
nobody's like some people might, but I mean, generally speaking, the vast majority of the population are not going to do heroin if it's legalized.
Yeah.
Now, if you do, again, personal responsibility, take care of your own self. But yeah, I mean, I think it's those types of things that, and I think that's what really a lot of people gravitated towards Ron Paul and other people like him is that he didn't argue based on personal benefit or benefit for his biggest supporters or lobbyists or whatever. He
Yeah.
argued straight from a foundation, a strong foundation of principle and ideals. And I think that's why people really gravitated him, and that's really kind of who I am as well. As I'm not trying to say that I have all the answers, but when you come to me with an issue, I'm going to address it with my ideals and my foundation principles in mind, and I'm not just going to say something to placate anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will serve you well, especially if the principles are freedom oriented, because
Yeah.
that is a popular message. I mean, speaking, just getting back to your campaign, um, are there any particular issues that you like to talk about or address as far as like in your either your platform or like if you have certain points that you always like to hit on as far as like why you're running and what's in your power as an office or anything like that? Or
Yeah, and okay, again, like I'm running a very kind of non-traditional campaign.
sure,
Um,
sure,
whereas I love to talk about all of the issues, like
okay,
because ultimately, again, I'm bringing it back to core principles. And so, but that being said, some of the core issues that have been brought up to me by people within the district and anything like that is very much education, very much government overreach, i.e., the COVID protocols that were put down. Um, so those are two very big ones. I mean, obviously now I believe that school safety is going to be coming up, which is important. And you know, one of the other big ones is uh, occupational licensing. I know a lot of
mm-hmm.
people that are, they want to open their own business or they want to be like an independent contractor or whatever, but there are so many hoops and so much red tape that they have to. And someone, I was talking to a um, a dispensary owner that they just opened, and like it is ridiculously expensive to open a dispensary. And so, like, somebody who could grow whatever these plants, I don't even know the right terminology for these things, so
Yeah,
but grow these things, and sell and do whatever and make some money or whatever. They can't do that unless they have like whatever it is, like $100,000. Like who has a
yeah,
$100,000 just like sitting around? And if you are somebody who knows your stuff but doesn't have great credit or whatever, like you might be able to do it on your own, but a bank is not going to give you $100,000 loan because you're some pothead coming in and saying, "Hey, I know my stuff." You know.
yeah,
So I mean, you need licensing to be a boxer. You need to pass tests and licenses to cut hair, and it's
yeah,
all these ridiculous government rules that are originating from these big companies that can afford to pay these fines and these entry fees and things like that, and it really boxes out any sort of individual entrepreneur, and it's really sad. And you see rundown areas all over the city, within my district, within all of the districts. And my thing is like, man, if we get rid of some of these, lower some taxes, obviously, as libertarians, we want to get rid of all of them, but,
yeah,
baby steps here, lower some taxes and things like that. How many of these areas could be revitalized by the people that live right next door that would love to go into these places and start a small business, but they can't. They're prohibited because they don't have enough money. And especially now in the days of inflation, which I don't have any control over that directly,
Yeah.
um, you know, we really need opportunities for these folks, instead of, more hindrances. And so those are some of the key issues that I think, are really, being brought to me and are going to come up, over the next couple of months.
I always think it's interesting, especially with, say, marijuana. I believe it's in California where it's become so burdensome, so prohibitively expensive to, even though it's legal, that the government basically ruined that industry, and they've driven a lot of it still under. So it's easier for you to maybe go to your neighbor and go buy
Yeah,
some marijuana, as opposed to going and doing it by the book. I'm using air quotes, but
yeah,
like legally. So that's always a fascinating thing, because I think that if you got, and I think this is proven out, if you got rid of the profit motive, as far as like by driving underground, I mean, if you made it so everything was above ground, you would have less violence, less crime. You would have so many benefits that aren't really measurable in the traditional sense. But you can see those benefits. But of course, the government's going to stomp that idea to the
yeah.
ground by
No, and
striking
I think that, that's a great opportunity for the state, assembly and the state legislature. Now, obviously, I would be only one person, and hopefully, we can really have a movement coming, this November. Hopefully, get multiple libertarians elected.
Sure.
Um, but I think that's an opportunity for us really to invoke and push that 10th Amendment of, like, federal government, get out of here. I think it was in Missouri over the last, maybe it was last year or the year before, where, their assembly or their legislature, passed, this, uh, code that said that our state and local police are no longer able to, assist federal,
Yeah.
officers in enforcing federal gun laws. And so basically, the federal government can still come in and force their own if they want. There's
Yeah.
no stopping them, but the federal government doesn't have the resources to do that.
Yeah.
So essentially, all federal gun laws in Missouri are no longer in effect,
Yeah.
more or less, because the state is no longer doing the investigations. They're no longer doing the arrests. They're no longer holding people. They're not charging anybody. And so all of these things. In Missouri is like we now have I think they have a constitutional carry now, and so so basically, it is how it should be in Missouri, how it should be everywhere. And I think we can do similar things like that here. I would love to see things like that, you know, um, with federal, drug laws. Like,
Yeah.
just stop, just stop helping the DEA, because they don't have enough agents. They don't have enough money to go in and do these raids. They, rely on local law enforcement and state law enforcement to do it for them.
Yeah.
And so just stop doing those things. Um, and I think that's a really great opportunity, for us at the state assembly, to accomplish some of those, things, and increase the amount of freedom and liberty that we have. And I think also, and this one's a tough one, because, it's, the water level and water, needs in
Mhm.
Nevada.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're all suffering through the drought, um, but I think that that is another area in which the state, assembly can really kind of use the power that they do have to hopefully help, the people of the state of Nevada, um, and not, California gets their water at the expense of us.
Yeah.
Granted, yes, we get our water at the expense of Colorado and Utah because the Colorado River goes through them,
That's
but,
right.
um, the just if you look at the amount of water that we use versus Southern California, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And so I think there are mechanisms that we can use there as well to address that issue. And I was talking with a number of our fellow libertarian friends, about how Southern California can really solve their own water problem by building some desalinization plants and some nuclear power plants. They just refuse to do so, and so instead of doing that, they, you know, drain the rest of the Southwest dry, which is certainly not an acceptable solution to Southern California's water problem. Um,
Yeah, I know the nuclear power plant. I mean, it's just a naturally not in my backyard sort of thing for Californians in general. But I mean, I guess,
yeah.
but it's proven to be very very safe compared to other forms
Oh yeah. I mean,
of
ecologically,
generation.
and I mean, even even if they didn't want nuclear power plants, there is tidal wave power generation. So
Yeah,
basically,
yeah,
you know, you put these things in, they don't impact the environment or the fish or anything like that, hardly at all. And the tide is going to continue to come in and go out as long as we have a moon. So unless the moon disappears, you will always have power. And so I think that's really important because you see even the power being generated by the dams along the Colorado River.
mhm,
That power production is going down. So we're going to have to rely on other sources of power anyway. And so it's one of the big things for my campaign and why I'm wanting to get involved is that politicians constantly talk about trying to solve problems, but they never actually want to solve the problem. They
yeah,
want to have the problem persist so that they can continue to use fear or pull at the heartstrings or whatever to gain campaign funds, to gain votes, so they can maintain their power, so they can enrich themselves.
yeah.
Um, and that is really one of the driving forces behind why I am getting involved, is because like I can't stand it anymore. Like I've always recognized the hypocrisy. I've always recognized the issues, but it just seems to be coming to a head for me, and it's something I can't deal with anymore.
This is the intersection of time and your experience and what you think that the direction that say this country or the state is heading in. Now I get it. I get it. I mean, I think that actually, I was just going to get back to what you had mentioned about enforcing gun laws. The sheriff is the highest law enforcement in a particular county.
Hmm.
So there is a history like next door in Nye County. There was a sheriff who actually kicked the feds out.
Yeah,
And it went all the way to the Supreme Court because it had to do with something with cattle and land grazing and everything else, and how I think it was the BLM wanted to was seizing cattle. This was, like I said, this is in Nye County, not the one up in Bunker Hill a
yeah,
few years back, but yeah, that went up to all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the sheriff did act within his powers, and the BLM had to drop the case.
yeah,
But that's the case of the sheriff, like I said, kicking the feds out and doing what he had to do as far as making sure that everything was done constitutionally, and did not helping the feds, not going in there and like the local resources being used to tyrannize their population. But so let's get back to your campaign. I mean, I think that you're on the right. The stuff you say to me, it gets me excited. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I like the way you talk. So because like these are the ideas that I've always had in my head as well.
hmm.
Um, if there was anything that you think would be most helpful to you in your campaign, could you name it?
I think just helping get the word out. And so like things like
Mhm.
this, reaching the people of my district, you know, and I'm always hesitant. I don't want to say I'm hesitant, but I'm always worried about going door to door.
Mhm.
Not because I'm worried about talking to people face to face, but you
Mhm.
know, sometimes people have this idea of politics, right? And it stays outside the home, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, having somebody come to your door is not always the most welcome thing, right?
Yeah.
Then there's the other side of it of like, hey, at least the person running cares enough about me to stop by my house. So, I mean, it's kind of this like, you know, flip of the coin, it could go either
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, generally getting the word out because with my campaign, as with virtually every other libertarian campaign. I don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I'm also running a campaign where I'm going to start doing some fundraising, but I'm very hesitant about fundraising because I don't have a um how do I want to put this? I have a hesitancy, like most people, about how much money is in politics.
Mhm.
And I want to live my principles and I want to live, and campaign the way I believe things should be, right? And so I think there should be very little money in politics, right? And so I've always been hesitant about going and asking for money for my campaign because in my mind, bringing back like the broken fallacy thing of like, oh, wars create money. No, like, or wars create wealth. It's like, well,
Yeah.
things were destroyed. So yes, you have to rebuild them. But if you didn't have to rebuild them, what else could you have spent money on? Right.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
if you weren't spending money on my campaign, what else could you have spent money on? Right.
Yeah.
Like, could you have employed another employee or saved that or whatever? And so,
Expanded or just done
yeah.
something else. Yeah.
So, or I don't know, bought your kid a new pair of shoes. Cause
Yeah.
honestly, part of me is thinking like that's probably going to be more worth it than a sign. But I'm coming around to it. Like I'm going to start doing some fundraising. But one of the things that I am encouraging people to do is, um, if you have say $50 to donate to my campaign, I encourage you to donate $25 to my campaign and $25 to a nonprofit that addresses an issue that you are concerned about. Because and I'm trying to, I don't know, change the mindset of the general public of the government is not your savior. The government is not going to fix your problems. In fact, the government causes and creates more problems than it fixes. So we need to find voluntary ways to address the issues that we care about. And so if you care about homelessness and you like my campaign, donate $25 to my campaign and donate $25 to a homeless shelter. Or, if you want to find a cure for cancer, like a lot of us do, right? I don't think
Sure.
there's anybody out there who doesn't want to find a cure for cancer. Um, donate $25 to my campaign and donate $25 to a cancer organization, right? And
Sure.
so, or if you are that passionate about a particular issue, donate that entire $50 to that nonprofit and spread the word. Use the power of your voice to talk about my campaign, because that is really one of the cruxes behind libertarianism, behind me as a person, and behind my campaign is getting people engaged and involved in solving the issues that they care about, addressing their own issues instead of constantly looking to the government to then take resources from other people to then give it to me or give it to the people I care about. It's I don't remember who said it, but uh, and forgive me for not being able to quote exactly, but essentially it was a forced virtue is no virtue at all,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so if I feel good because the government has this program to help poor people, but I'm not out there helping poor people myself, I'm not a virtuous person,
Yeah.
right?
Or you're
Um,
taking money through force from other people to
yeah,
support a cause, and that's not virtuous at all
no,
either.
no, it's immoral actually.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they're in a nutshell is kind of who I am and what my campaign is about. And so when you said what is the thing that I need most for my campaign is I need help getting the word out about why this is important, why my campaign is different, and how people can engage. Like I would rather have somebody say, um, email me or reach out to me on social media and say, hey, I donated 3 hours of my time to do this thing, but I'm going to vote for you, but I'm not giving you any money. I would rather have somebody say that than somebody write me $1,000 check,
Yeah.
because that means more to me, and that means more to our community than it does than a campaign donation. So
Take
that
human
might get me in
action,
trouble,
people.
might make me lose the race. I don't know, but whatever.
I was just saying that. Just take human action, people. That's what you need to
Yes,
do.
exactly.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the end of the time. We usually like to keep these the recordings, around this time. So, if you have any closing statements, I mean, I kind of asked you a closing statement, but if you have anything else you wanted to add,
Um,
feel free.
Yeah, no, I mean, anyone who's listening, go to electrosiahlarrow.com. You can follow me on the socials. I've got Instagram, Electrosiah LaRow, Facebook. I think it's Josiah LaRow for Nevada Assembly 20, something like that. YouTube, Electrosiah LaRow. So yeah, just helping get that word out. All those like stupid YouTube like, comment, share.
Yeah.
Click the bell, all those stupid things, get those they may sound stupid, but it's important, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
all of those things.
I'll make sure that I put links for those in the episode description. So,
Fantastic.
okay, well, I appreciate your time, Josiah. Thanks for coming on, and maybe because we're coming the elections in November, so maybe we might have you like just get an update and see how it's going, like maybe a
Yeah.
little bit before.
Yeah,
So
I'd be happy
we'll
to.
have you back on. All right, great. That was Josiah LaRow. This has been the Battleborn Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time.
This has been the Battleborn Podcast, brought to you by the Libertarian Party of Nevada. Check us out at our website, lpnevada.org, where you can learn more about us and about libertarianism, the greatest political philosophy known to man. At lpnevada.org, you can become a member, donate, volunteer, check out our upcoming events, or just sign up for our newsletter. Help us make the world a more free place, beginning right here in Nevada. That's lpnevada.org, the home of the Libertarian Party of Nevada.